August 12, 30 BC, Alexandria, Egypt. The most powerful woman in the world is dead. Cleopatra VII, last pharaoh of Egypt, lies motionless on a golden couch in her mausoleum. She's 39 years old, dressed in her finest royal robes, a crown on her head, two handmaidens dying at her feet. The official story claims she had taken her own life by letting a venomous asp bite her bare breast to avoid being paraded through Rome as a prisoner. Romantic, poetic, tragic. Also probably a complete lie. The snake was never found. No one saw it enter the mausoleum. The timeline doesn't work. And here's the part they never mention. The man who controlled the crime scene, the man who wrote the official report, the man who benefited most from her death was Octavian, future emperor of Rome. He had every reason to want her dead and every tool to cover it up. This isn't romantic legend. This is a 2,000-year-old cold case, and the primary suspect got away with murder. Before we solve a murder, you need to understand who died. Cleopatra wasn't born Egyptian. She was Greek, descended from Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals who seized Egypt after Alexander died. Her family had ruled for 300 years through a brutal combination of murder, incest, and political genius. Cleopatra's father married his sister. Her siblings fought each other for the throne. This wasn't a Disney princess. This was a survivor. But Cleopatra had something her ancestors didn't. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler in 3 centuries who actually learned to speak Egyptian. She spoke 9 languages fluently. Ancient historians describe her as brilliant, charismatic, and ruthless. She presented herself as the living incarnation of Isis, the Egyptian goddess of magic and motherhood. And she understood one critical truth. Egypt was rich, but Rome was powerful. To survive, she needed a Roman protector. That protector arrived in 48 BC. Julius Caesar landed in Alexandria during Egypt's civil war, and Cleopatra saw her opportunity. She allegedly had herself smuggled into his quarters rolled up in a carpet. She was 21, he was 52. Within months, she was pregnant with his son, Caesarion. Caesar crushed her rivals, and Cleopatra became the undisputed queen of Egypt. Then in 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated. 33 stab wounds on the floor of the Roman Senate. Cleopatra's world collapsed. She fled back to Egypt with her infant son and waited. Rome tore itself apart in the civil war. 3 men emerged to divide the empire: Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir Lepidus, a politician, and Mark Antony, a charismatic general who controlled the eastern provinces. In 41 BC, Antony summoned Cleopatra to answer charges that she'd aided his enemies. She arrived dressed as the goddess Venus on a golden barge with purple sails and silver oars. Plutarch describes it as theatrical seduction on an epic scale. It worked. Antony was captivated. They spent the winter together, and Cleopatra bore him 3 children. For a decade, they ruled the eastern Mediterranean as partners, but Octavian watched from Rome, seething. Antony was marrying foreign queens, promoting Egyptian interests, acting like an Eastern king instead of a Roman general. Octavian saw his opportunity. In 31 BC, he declared war, not on Antony directly, but on Cleopatra. He painted her as a foreign seductress corrupting Roman values. The propaganda was brutal and effective. On September 2, 31 BC, the Battle of Actium erupted off the coast of Greece. Octavian's navy crushed them in a devastating defeat. Cleopatra fled to Egypt with 60 ships, Antony following behind her. Their combined forces surrendered without much of a fight. For nearly a year, they waited in Alexandria, watching helplessly as Octavian slowly tightened the noose around Egypt. July 30 BC, Octavian's army reached the gates of Alexandria. Antony's remaining forces surrendered without a fight. Cleopatra retreated to her mausoleum with her treasures. A false message reached Antony that she was dead. Devastated, he stabbed himself with his sword. But the wound wasn't immediately fatal. He survived long enough to learn the truth. His men carried him to Cleopatra's mausoleum. Ancient sources describe him being hoisted through an upper window by ropes because she refused to open the door. He died in her arms. The stage was set for the final act. August 1st to August 12th, 30 BC. Let's reconstruct what happened. Cleopatra is barricaded inside her mausoleum, a 2-story structure near her palace. With her are 2 handmaidens, Eras and Charmian, possibly a eunuch, and the accumulated wealth of Egypt. Gold, jewels, treasure enough to pay an entire Roman army. Octavian has a problem. He desperately needs Cleopatra alive, not because he cares about her, but because he needs that treasure. Without it, he can't pay his soldiers. If she burns the mausoleum with herself inside, Rome's richest prize goes up in smoke. So he sends envoys, promises of mercy, hints of clemency, all lies, but Cleopatra doesn't know that yet. According to Plutarch, Octavian sends Gaius Proculaeus, a member of his staff, to negotiate. Proculaeus uses a ladder to breach an upper window while Cleopatra is distracted. She's captured before she can set fire to the treasure. Ancient sources claim she tried to stab herself but was disarmed. She's moved to the palace under guard. Octavian visits her personally. Some sources claim she tried to seduce him like she had Caesar and Antony. They describe Octavian resisting her charms, maintaining his moral superiority. This is almost certainly propaganda. Octavian was known for his affairs. The real question was never seduction. It was power. Cleopatra makes one thing crystal clear to Octavian. According to the historian Livy, she tells him directly, "I will not be led in a triumph." Octavian doesn't answer. He just says her life will be spared. No details, no promises. Then on August 9th, a member of Octavian's staff secretly warns Cleopatra that Octavian plans to leave for Rome in 3 days and take her and her children with him. She knows what that means: paraded through Rome in chains, displayed like an animal, then strangled in a dungeon while crowds cheer. This was standard practice for defeated foreign leaders. Her younger sister Arsinoe had been paraded in Caesar's triumph before being spared and exiled. Cleopatra wasn't going to wait for that humiliation. August 10th or 12th, sources differ on the exact date. Cleopatra is allowed to visit Antony's tomb to pay her respects. She returns to the palace. She bathes, dresses in her finest royal garments and jewelry. She eats a meal. She writes a note to Octavian requesting to be buried with Antony. A guard delivers it. Then, in the time it takes for Octavian to read the note and send guards back, Cleopatra and both of her handmaidens are dead. The guards break in. Cleopatra lies on a golden couch wearing her crown and royal robes. Eras is already dead at her feet. Charmian is adjusting Cleopatra's diadem with her last breaths. One guard allegedly asks, "Was this well done of your lady?" Charmian responds before dying, "Extremely well, and as befitting the descendant of so many kings." No snake is found, no murder weapon, no signs of struggle. The crime scene is controlled entirely by Octavian's men, and here's where the official story gets really strange. Ancient sources claim an asp, an Egyptian cobra, was smuggled into the room in a basket of figs. Cleopatra held it to her breast and died almost instantly. Her maids died the same way. Let's talk about why that's impossible. Egyptian cobras are 5 to 8 feet long, too large to hide in a fig basket. Also, not all cobra bites are lethal. Even when they are, death takes hours, not minutes. Victims experience swelling, necrosis, excruciating pain, and slow paralysis. Ancient physician Galen documented execution by cobra in Alexandria. The symptoms don't match. The timeline doesn't work either. The guard would have taken only minutes to deliver Cleopatra's note to Octavian and return, but cobra venom would require at least 2 hours to take a life, and even then survival was likely. How did all 3 women die so quickly? Some ancient writers tried to fix this problem. Strabo suggested maybe it wasn't a snake at all, but a poisonous ointment. Plutarch mentions she might have used a sharp implement like a hairpin to scratch her skin and introduce poison. Cassius Dio claims Octavian even sent snake charmers to try to suck the venom out and revive her. But here's what makes this most suspicious. Octavian controlled every detail of what happened next. He allowed Cleopatra to be buried with Antony as she requested. He gave Eras and Charmian proper burials, and then he made sure everyone knew she died by snakebite. During his triumph in Rome, he didn't parade Cleopatra's body. Instead, he displayed an effigy of her with a snake coiled around her arm. The message was clear: her life had been taken by an exotic Egyptian serpent. Not murder, never murder. The snake story was perfect propaganda. Romantic, foreign, fitting for an Egyptian queen who claimed to be a goddess. It made Octavian look merciful for allowing her a dignified death, and it completely obscured what really happened in that room. Let's examine the suspects. Motive was overwhelming. Cleopatra alive was a massive political problem. Even in captivity, she could become a rallying point for his enemies. Worse, her son with Julius Caesar, 17-year-old Caesarion, had a direct blood claim to Caesar's legacy. Octavian's claim was only through adoption. As long as Cleopatra and her son lived, they threatened everything Octavian had built. If he paraded her in his triumph, he risked public sympathy. His own advisors remembered what happened when Caesar paraded Arsinoe. The Roman crowd felt pity for the foreign princess in chains. It didn't enhance Caesar's glory, it diminished it. Octavian couldn't risk that. He also needed her treasure desperately. If she had taken her own life with advance warning, she could destroy everything in the mausoleum. He needed her dead but couldn't afford to let her choose the timing. Method and opportunity were perfect. His men controlled the palace. His guards were stationed outside her room. If he wanted her silenced, it would have been simple. Quick-acting poison administered by force, strangulation made to look peaceful, even simple suffocation while she slept. The evidence is damning. Within weeks of Cleopatra's death, Octavian ordered the execution of Caesarion. He allegedly said, "2 Caesars is one too many." Then he annexed Egypt as his personal province. The treasure went directly to paying his soldiers. By 27 BC, he became Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Criminal profiler Pat Brown spent years investigating this case for a Discovery Channel documentary in 2004. She later published her findings in the book, The Murder of Cleopatra. Her conclusion: Cleopatra was likely imprisoned, possibly tortured and murdered. The story that she took her life was Octavian's cover. Brown points out behavioral patterns. Cleopatra came from a family of survivors who fought viciously for power. She had spent her entire life navigating assassination attempts and political intrigue. Does someone like that suddenly give up and take her own life? Or does she fight until the very end? The case for a self-inflicted end rests on Cleopatra's own character and circumstances. She knew exactly what awaited her in Rome. She'd seen what happened to defeated foreign rulers. Humiliation, degradation, eventual elimination. For someone who presented herself as a living goddess, that fate was unthinkable. She was also a documented expert on poisons. Ancient sources describe her testing various toxins on condemned prisoners to see which provided the quickest, most painless end. She rejected fast-acting poisons as too painful and slow poisons as too unreliable. According to some scholars, she may have developed a custom mixture. German historian Christoph Schiefer worked with toxicologist Dietrich Mebs in 2010 to determine what Cleopatra might have used. Their conclusion was that it was a mixture of hemlock, wolfsbane, and opium. The opium would sedate her. The hemlock and wolfsbane would stop her heart within 30 minutes. She would fall asleep and never wake up. This theory explains why her passing appeared peaceful. Ancient sources describe her lying serenely on her couch, as if sleeping. Cobra venom wouldn't produce that effect, but a carefully calibrated poison cocktail would. It also explains the 2 handmaidens. If Cleopatra was choosing this path, she may have offered her most loyal servants the option to go with her rather than face torture or slavery under Roman rule. Eras and Charmian might have willingly taken the same poison. The symbolic power of the asp story could have been Cleopatra's own creation. She understood propaganda. By claiming she would perish by Cobra, the sacred symbol of Egyptian royalty and the goddess Isis, she transformed her defeat into a mythic, goddess-like exit. Let Octavian have Egypt's gold, she would have the immortal story. But there are problems with this theory. If Cleopatra wanted to take this path, why wait? Why allow herself to be captured, moved to the palace, and held under guard? Why not choose this in her mausoleum with Antony when she still had control? Some historians argue she was negotiating for her children's safety. She needed time to arrange their protection before she passed. But Octavian had Caesarion eliminated immediately and took her other 3 children to Rome as hostages. If she chose this to save them, it didn't work. This is the middle ground theory. Octavian didn't directly end Cleopatra's life, but he forced her to take her own life in a manner of his choosing. Ancient historian Patricia Southern suggests this scenario. Octavian couldn't parade Cleopatra without political risk. He couldn't overtly have her eliminated without looking like a tyrant, but he could give her an ultimatum: take this path now in a dignified manner, or your children perish too. This would explain the timing. Cleopatra waited until she had no other options, then chose poison over public humiliation. It would explain why Octavian allowed her to be buried with Antony and gave her maids proper burials. He was honoring a negotiated agreement, not showing mercy. It would also explain the snake story. Perhaps Cleopatra and Octavian agreed on the narrative together. She gets a mythic passing befitting a pharaoh. He gets her out of the way without bloodying his hands. Both benefit from the legend. The problem with this theory is that it still requires us to trust Octavian's version of events. And Octavian was a proven liar and manipulator who spent decades crafting propaganda about his enemies. There's a fourth, less likely possibility. Someone in Cleopatra's inner circle, bribed by Octavian, poisoned her and the maids. Perhaps the eunuch mentioned in some sources. Perhaps someone who brought food or wine. This theory has minimal evidence, but can't be completely ruled out. In a world where family members regularly murdered each other for power, betrayal was always possible. But it doesn't fit the broader patterns. If Octavian used an assassin, why create the elaborate snake mythology? Why not just claim she died of illness or grief? What does modern science tell us? In 2010, German toxicologist Dietrich Mebs analyzed the asp theory in detail. His conclusion was that it was absolutely implausible. Egyptian cobras in August heat wouldn't have stayed docile in a basket. Even if one bit Cleopatra, the venom acts too slowly. Symptoms include severe pain, massive swelling, and tissue damage. Ancient sources describe Cleopatra looking peaceful, with only 2 small puncture marks on her arm. That doesn't match cobra envenomation. If she used poison, what kind? The hemlock, wolfsbane, and opium combination proposed by Schiefer and Mebs fits the evidence. Opium was readily available in Egypt. Wolfsbane grew in the Mediterranean. Hemlock was well known from the execution of Socrates. Mixed properly, this cocktail would cause sedation followed by cardiac and respiratory failure within 30 to 45 minutes. Peaceful, relatively painless, and fast enough to match the timeline. But here's the critical problem: we have no physical evidence. Cleopatra's tomb has never been found. Without her body, we can't test for poison residue. We can't examine bone chemistry. We can't perform DNA analysis. Every conclusion rests on ancient texts written decades after the fact by historians who never witnessed the events and had political reasons to support Octavian's narrative. Excavations at Taposiris Magna, a temple west of Alexandria, have found coins and statues of Cleopatra, leading some archaeologists to speculate her tomb might be there. But nothing definitive has been discovered. Her final resting place remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Without her body, without her tomb, without any physical evidence, the truth remains buried somewhere beneath the streets of Alexandria. A 2,000-year-old cold case with a prime suspect who became emperor and rewrote history in his own image. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe for more ancient cold cases.